Every time a rock is struck, dust and particles are removed. Wear eye protection and take extreme caution not to breathe the dust. The dust will get into your lungs and act like they were tiny razor blades, and this can lead to serious permanent health problems, including death. Hi there, my name's John McPherson. Thought we'd spend a little time making an arrowhead. I believe what this will show you is that making an arrowhead is not that difficult. So what makes making an arrowhead so easy? Well, if you've got the proper material, turning an arrowhead out of it just simply following some rules. The basic rule in all flint knapping: your energy shoots down, strikes the surface, it shoots off into a cone. BB striking a piece of glass. What we're doing is removing a slice of this cone. Also, with this rule is that when the flake is struck and the energy is running, the flake wants to curl. That's why the shape of an arrowhead is generally lens-shaped, like an eye. When pressure flaking, I use my hand and arms to primarily hold everything in place. Most energy comes from my squeezing my knees together. My wrists are locked in, and when I apply my pressure, most force comes from squeezing my knees together. This way I'm taking energy from my hands, my arms, my shoulders, my back, and my legs, and putting it all into the tip of the pressure flaker. We cannot forget the physics of the cone. The same rules of the cone apply with pressure flaking as it does with percussion. The energy changes direction upon impact. When I'm shooting a long flake, my energy is in the direction that the pressure flaker is pointing. All my energy right now is pushing directly into that pressure flaker straight ahead, but due to the cone, the energy wants to shoot out through the stone. It won't do that. What I do is I change the direction of that force of energy by using my wrist to pull the pressure flaker out, which is towards my palm, away from the stone. At that point, the energy of the cone starts to shoot more along the surface of the stone. I'm pushing now in the direction that the pressure flaking is pointing, and now I'm changing that direction by pulling the pressure flaker down more into my palm, a little at a time, until it releases. So what appears to be my pushing that flake off is not so. I'm pushing everything together and then pulling that flake off. If you got the rules and you got the material and you can follow the instructions, basically you just remove flakes from a rock, and from those your result, in our case here, it's an arrowhead. Actually, two of them. What I'll make first is an arrowhead here. I'll make that from a flake. Not a real difficult job. The second one I make, I'll make from just the rock I picked up in the river. I made two to overcome some problems that people come across on the removal of flakes. Making an arrowhead from a flake offers one set of problems, where making an arrowhead from a rock offers another set. Same rules, same principles. Being able to make an arrowhead doesn't make one a flint knapper. A flint knapper can take any type of flint type of rock using a variety of methods and turn it into a tool from the raw materials. In the realm of flint knappers, I'm not a real good flint knapper. There'll be good flint knappers that watch what I'm doing and they'll say, "John, don't do that." I've learned from experience over the years. I haven't taken instruction from people better than I. And that just makes me stubborn. It doesn't make me smart. The fact that a beginner might be watching this tape just means you have more sense than I had. I've been exposed to some flint knappers over the years. I can maybe pick one point I picked from Brian, and then one I picked from Dave, and one I picked from Jim. You can't help but absorb. To make it my method or my system, as I say, which is not, it's a worldwide system. But the sequence that I do things is what I have developed over the years, because I haven't been associated with better flint knappers who were able to teach me maybe the proper way of doing things. But what I show here will enable a novice with the proper material and the proper tools to follow some basic rules. And by reduction, by removing flakes from this rock, we'll be able to turn out a functional arrowhead. I've showed just about every blow or pressure flake removal of both these arrowheads as I went, and I narrated over several. If you have a certain knowledge of flint knapping, if just from your own experience, however limited or not it may be, you can see what I'm doing at each step and adapt it. Maybe see something, wow, this is where I'm making a mistake, this is where I'm doing something wrong. One thing to try to really be aware of is that this is a process of reduction. I'm removing. Once removed, it's gone. I refer to making the piece as wide, as long, as thin as I can. It's kind of like my assessment my goal when I work every day. It's just my homework assignment. Every time you strike this stone, you're removing some of its width. So if you study what's here and go out and apply it, I think you have a good time, if nothing else. Be aware of the safety. I'll tell you about some tools right now. Tools of the trade. I have one leather pad I place on my palm for pressure flaking. A couple of pieces of leather I place on my knee to absorb blows, to help absorb shock waves. I do a good share of my percussion with the hammerstone. I really like to work a lot with this because in a primitive situation or survival situation, the hammerstone is more likely what you'll come across. And I do a significant portion also in this video using the billet, the antler billet. There is a difference. This is generally called hard percussion, where this is called soft percussion. It does dry flakes differently. Each one grips the stone a little different from the other. Sometimes I can bang away with one and not get a flake to remove, where I can just go to another. You'll see me doing a tremendous amount of work with the pressure flaking tool. Here I have just antler that does most of it. I like to do a lot of my work with antler just because it is natural. But I also do a lot of work using copper because it saves on antler. Copper will do things antler cannot do. In this case, this is just some heavy-duty electrical wire set into a stick. Could be any stick. I drilled a hole in the end and stuck the wire in, and as it works down, I can cut off some of the stick. So I guess I'd better get on with the show and see what we can do about making an arrowhead. I'm going to make just a simple arrowhead. The one thing I need is a source of material from someplace. So I'll just basically now look at my feet, and I mean that literally. By doing a lot of flint knapping, I accumulate quite a pile of material for making arrowheads in the way of flakes. What we'll work with this morning is some chert that I brought back from Wyoming. Right here I've got 4 flakes I just picked at random that all have an arrowhead in them. So let's see what I'm looking for first off. All these flakes have one thing in common, is that they're basically flat. Which means there's not an undue amount of curling. Take a look, example, at this particular flake. What we need is something flat and straight like a piece of glass. Because anything that is not in that flat plane isn't going to make an arrowhead. Let me explain that a little bit. An arrowhead needs to be flat like a piece of glass. Many flakes curl off. Everything that's not flat has to be removed as not part of your arrowhead. So the first thing we're going to look for is how long of a flat plane do I have in my flake from which I'll remove my arrowhead. Let's also look at a few qualities that we don't want in a flake. Here really looks like a pretty good flake, first glance, and it's a real fine tool. Got some good edges for working with. But for making an arrowhead, is what we're looking after right now, it's got a terrible amount of curl to it. So the usable tool is only going to be, maybe 2/3 of the length of that once we got to it. It also has a lot of cortex, which is the outside rind of the stone on the back, and generally we cannot incorporate that into our tool. Sometimes it's hard enough where it works all right, but by the time we got rid of that, we've just got a lot to get rid of before we even begin to start making an arrowhead. Well, here's one that just has absolutely no use whatsoever. I just refer to it as a clunky piece. You need a certain amount of width to thickness. Here's an example here. Notice how thin this piece is in comparison to its width. It's probably 7 times wider than it is thick. That gives us something to work with to get an arrowhead out of. Whenever you take a flake off, you have to thin this piece as you go. Remember, every time you hit it, there's less left behind to strike again. So you need a certain width to thickness ratio. This particular piece has got all good qualities going for it. It doesn't have a curl, appreciable curl to it. It's really wide in compared to its thickness, yet there's enough thickness there to allow us to create solid platforms to strike and remove flakes. This would be a perfect piece to turn out a nice projectile point small arrowhead. So we'll begin with this, and you can see we have a flat plane running almost the entire length. This little hook here at this end runs out of your flat plane, so we'll end up immediately getting rid of that. So our first goal, once we choose the piece we're going to work with, the flake we're going to work with, is to eliminate anything that's not flat, does not lie in this level plane that this arrowhead is going to come out of. We'll start by chopping off some short flakes in the right direction to leave platforms to allow me to come back and start nibbling away at that curly end. I pretty much can use the entire length for making my projectile point. I'm going to take this, my thick end, make it my point, bring up my first goal will be to work out a shape about like this. That might be larger, might be smaller. Smaller if I make a mistake, larger if I don't make too many mistakes. I'll use a variety of methods of percussion and pressure flaking to get myself down to a preform area. Generally what I do is I just remove flakes until I get a bifacial preform. Bifacial means flakes removed entirely across both sides, as long and wide and thin as I can. That's my basic homework assignment. Now the breathing you hear me working with is my breath control, where I try to blow this cloud of dust away before I inhale. I don't want that in my lungs. Sometimes I have wind that works for me. This morning there is none. Now remember, one of the rules we spoke of in my first video was you can't drive a flat flake. So we have a flat surface here, and flakes don't want to run flat. They want to curl. So what I'm doing initially is I'm taking some short flakes. And I'll go all the way around on this side shooting short ones up. Then I'll take another series to take them a little longer until they meet at the middle. At that point we'll end up with a rounded surface, thicker in the middle and narrower at the side. So here I've gone around most part of the surface with little short flakes driving in. I've kept this tip out here, which eventually I'll end up getting rid of to stay within my plane for my projected arrowhead. It'll come off soon enough. Right now I'm just working with it. Actually, I'll leave it a little longer and wider so that I'm not locked into any design, and I can make it wider or longer if I desire. Right here is a little bad spot in the flake, and that could end up to breakage if I'm not careful. I want to remove these flakes just a little at a time. If I just whop it real bad and hit it wrong, I'm going to snap that, and that's the weak spot. Yeah, and I just soon not do that yet. Now I'm hoping to get a couple into that bad spot. Now I can't drive beyond that. I can't drive long ones because I've got that little valley in here, so I'd be going through solid mass, out of it into this valley, and then back into it again. That won't happen. It's what I need to do is get that so this hill becomes lower than my valley. These three little ones got me started. That gets me almost as thick at the tip as in the valley. So we'll try just another series across there. The shape I'm getting to now is lending itself more to running a flake up through here. And I could be using the pressure flaker and knocking up through there too. I like to work an awful lot with my hammerstone. It's more likely what I'll come across in a wilderness situation. And generally, I can knock longer flakes through percussion. Now that's what I've been after. I can run a flake up longer. I've got flakes going across from side to side here. You can see it's just a little bit thinner or lower on the sides than it is in the middle. That means my flake is more likely to run even all the way across if I want it to. So I'll continue up here, drive my flakes in, and if it keeps working like I am, I'll end up with a basic preform a little bit larger than what we have outlined here. Removed a series of flakes here once before all the way. I'm setting my platform up where my center line of mass is back over onto the side that I want to remove flakes from. Because after my first series of flake removal, I got rid of my platform, and so now it's too sharp to strike into. On these flakes, what I'm doing is I'm pulling almost back into my palm, and that releases the pressure slightly off into the stone. Now you can see I have a surface now to strike on here and here to drive flakes back over into this side. My flakes didn't go quite as far as I really wanted them to. It's because I'm pretty thin in this area. I'd like to have had them go in almost to the halfway point. They didn't yet. I'll maybe even take one off the other side before I get back into finishing this. On this side here, well, we'll see where they take us. Now I've got a series of flakes just about across up into here. The thinner that my mass is, the less far I can drive my flake because I can't apply so much force. You can see yet, right where my thumb is at, we have a flat surface area. I really want to get my flakes through there. At the very beginning, what you're looking at towards the tip, that's the shape that I'm after. That's the shape I'm looking for. That's a lens shape. Our flakes naturally want to follow that contour. Before we go much further on this side, I believe I'll set up and drive some off of the reverse side of this. Which means now I'm going to need to take that line of my platform, short little choppy flakes. I'm just basically pushing and sometimes even pulling back. All I want is a platform along this edge that would allow me to apply pressure either through percussion or pressure flaking to drive my flakes off on this side now. Seem to have a little valley here which is narrower, or lower than the edge. So we have more of a dish shape going through here and here. So I can't run a flake the whole direction yet. What I need to do is run a short flake, maybe a third of the way up there. What that will do is straighten that line out. See, right now, that line running right in through there is a little dished. So I'll take a series of short flakes from the edge to eliminate that. That side worked out okay. Let's do the other. Set up a platform here to drive a flake down along that ridge. Set the platform up along the other side. Here's the side we have just run the flakes across. This is the side we're going to work on now. I drive a flake from one side, it has a tendency to stop at a certain point. And then all succeeding flakes want to stop at the same point. So if I have a weak platform in one, drive, stop, and then I go to the next one, it may not want to go through that. Where if I come in from the opposite side, I can pick up that line where it stops. This flake went beyond center, stopped over here, so let's go from the other side, and the flake overlaps and meets this, so we don't have this line that I sometimes have gotten. I believe what I'll do is I'll run a series of flakes along this side here, not the side we just worked on, but the other side of that, to get them to go cross. Do a final thinning job so that my finished preform or arrowhead will be just a little bit thinner than what we have right now. Set my platforms up for that side. I would like to point out that I'm removing off of one side of this antler because the center part of antler is pithy and it doesn't hold up to the abuse. So I take and I do my sharpening off to one side. So I'm getting into the harder part of the antler so it would last longer, hold up to more abuse. This one's pretty chewed up. You can see now where I'm starting to do some thinning. The smaller the thing gets, the more critical every movement comes. Sure, a lot easier to break it. A lot easier for platforms to crush. Not too far out of symmetrical. See, I can correct this up here where my thumb is at by removing a little over on this side where I'm pointing, and also down here at the base. When I get to finishing, that would get my line really straight. I'll first approach the base. What I'm going to do is cut it straight across there. These flakes are not being driven for any thinning. All I'm doing is removing this end of this rock that doesn't need to be there. I'll remove material off the side that lends to the curl. That'll straighten it out. I want to go and take my preform. I want to sharpen the edge all the way around. I've got a few spots along here. They're not as sharp as they could be. And I want them to be sharp. I want them to be razor sharp. So if these are to be used in hunting an animal, that once they penetrate, they slice like a serrated knife should. So I'll take my point, my triangle, and refine that down so I have a good triangle made out of it, preform. And that will be twofold. One, it will sharpen my entire edge, my cutting edge for going in, and it will also, by making it like a perfect triangle, make it easier for me to notch one in the top here to insert into my arrow shaft, and one on either side for actually wrapping my sinew or my thread around to adhere it to the shaft. Let me start by real fine flake. Now I'm not crushing. You'll note there's really small flakes here. I'm not crushing these off. I'm actually pushing individual flakes off. If I crush the edge, So then I end up dulling it. Now my flakes, as I've been going, as I set up my platforms, I set short flakes, which bevels my edge and gives me a blunt edge to push on. I don't want that for my arrowhead or my knife or whatever type of tool I'm making. I want my flake scars to run from the edge to the center at least. And what that does is it gives a sharp edge coming up. Here's what I'm working down, my triangle. I'm going to end up putting a notch in here, and a notch in here, and a notch in here. But my flake scars run up through to center. And what that does is it gives me an edge that has long, sharp cutting edges. Too often beginners, they get a triangle shape just by pushing flakes off like you see when I'm setting up platforms. And the edges that they create from their center come out, and then they're really blunt. Sometimes they just blunt off to one side. It's more of a chopping edge. You want your edge to come down like a knife, not like an axe. Now I can think about putting my notching in. I got to start there. It's not a finish, but let's go over my other side. I try to make them small when I start, because when I go to match up one side to the other, one is always a little higher or lower than the other. You know, so I pretty much take one flake from one side and then turn to go to the other. We don't need a big notch. I'm pretty careful as I do this on my support. I hold this into my pad, but I allow it to roll. As I apply pressure, I don't hold it really firm because I don't want to just snap it in half. And also, I don't set it so it runs through this crease in my palm. I set it so it runs on the heel of my palm. If you put it where it runs in the crease, you can just, because of that hollow in there, you can snap it right in half. Now this notch here, you want to be as wide as your arrow shaft. So what's the purpose of the base notch? Well, you mount it on a stick on an arrow shaft, and primitively, if you've cut notches into arrow shafts, it sometimes is not real easy. This just allows that point to fit down in that little bit further without having to notch it that far. And then the shaft will sit snug right to the base of that notch, and then either side will come off to the side up a ways, and then you've got, in this case, maybe a half of an inch to 3/4 of an inch of the shaft is going to be actually mounted to the stick. So now you've got a really solid entity between the arrow shaft and the stone. So here we have an arrowhead, which has got a really good point on it for penetration. It gets 2 needle nose, and then it'll break as it cuts in. It's got enough of a thickness to it to hold up to some abuse. Well, as you've seen, turning a flake into a small arrowhead is really a pretty simple job. Now here's a flake of a completely different color. Literally. This flake is actually large enough we would call it a spall. This has been knocked off of a larger piece. It's an old Aboriginal spall. I found it on the river. Also down here you can see a flake scar where whoever removed this ball removed a flake from this. Now, likely that flake that was removed was turned into a small tool of sorts, possibly a projectile point. This that it was removed from could be turned into a larger piece. Flakes are relatively easy to turn into projectile points once you are in possession of the rules. All of these pieces I picked up off the river have an arrowhead in them somewhere. They're all a flint type of material. And some would be easier to turn out than others. I think that this one's got enough problem areas in it that I should probably approach it. About 3/4 of its radius is covered with a cortex and is rounded and doesn't readily lend itself towards a prepared platform. And then we've got some real thin edges here. Two things I'm looking at to start with. One is I have low spot here and here on this side, and also a low spot here on the opposite. Those low spots I'll be turning into my high spots. In other words, eventually I'm going to remove all material on this side that's higher than this dish, which that low spot will then become the highest point. To get into this rounded edge where the cortex is at, I can approach it from either direction. I've got openings on this side and on this side, actually ends. I should be able to go and just open this up pretty easily to give me some surfaces to utilize as platforms. Got that corner removed. That sets up a platform here, something for me to strike to dive back down into here. Got a nice high point here to drive a flake across there. This little platform I have here, I have a swale here, so I can't drive a long flake. What I'm looking at is a short one. I'll get another short one right here. A lot of times, like right now when I'm striking, I got my finger underneath where I'm wanting that flake to go. I don't know, it's like I'm saying, remove here. Sometimes I utilize that finger to help make the flake be bigger by pulling on, and sometimes I hold that finger there to keep the flake from going in. I don't know if that helps or not, but it's just like if I hit it plain, that flake wants to do more what the flake wants it to do. Or if I put my finger here, maybe I can control some of that energy that's going into it. I don't know. Call me crazy. It's real rough, but I have edge all the way around it. Now I will drive flakes to shape it so that my low points in the middle become my high points. Well, that last flake took me down almost to this point. but it didn't get me yet through this outer rim. That ran a flake along that rim. This, where I've removed flakes, is almost now as low as my dish. You know, I've backed up in going through again what I've been through once. I explained this really well in my video, Breaking Rock. If I had gone and tried to remove another flake at this point through here, I would not go lower than the point that I had left here. I want to remove as much of that thickness as I can, so by backing up and removing a flake here, and then this one, what that does is it lowers this down. It would be easier now for me to remove a flake through here, because this is not helping to hold the side of that flake in. You've got a little high points here yet. We're almost down to the dish. What we'll do is we'll work on the opposite side. We'll get a center line running, shoot our flakes from both directions, and get this side shaped up. By the time we remove material in to get to that, well, then we can turn back over to the other side and then remove what's a little here to make this center ridge line here. We move now our center line from my left, your right, this side of the stone over to this side of the stone to dry flakes off of here. My control of flakes on this side will vary from running a series of short ones and then medium through this swale here to some solid ones to get through a ridge over on this side. Some might be pressure, some might be percussion with hammerstone, some might be percussion with baton. What I've got in mind is this, to me, my base, because it's just a little thinner. The projected point area is a little thicker, and so I have some width there. I can also remove some thickness down here if necessary. On this edge here, I have to redo my platform to drive flakes back over here to get rid of this ridge. That would even my mass up a little bit better. So I misread that. Now that I've gotten rid of most of that mass here, it takes my center line, I move it back over to this side. So I've got this side pretty much a line running lengthwise here. It waves a little. Now I'll go to my other side and refine one over here. Now we have a preform well underway to turn out a small arrowhead here. Ah! We pretty much have a ridge line down both sides of this preform, and I can set my platform up, run a series of flakes from one edge over, shoot from the other edge back and pick it up, try to eliminate that little mountain range. Down the middle, end up thinning it and truing it as we go. My center line all the way around pretty much lies in the center right at the moment. So I can run my platform off to shoot the flakes on either side I desire. What I'll do is choose my cleanest, smoothest side for my initial run of flakes since I have the most distance to cover. And then when I go and set my platform up on the reverse side, I'll have it narrower and it'll be easier for me to run a clean flake through any trouble spots. As I run a series of flakes, I generally start at my tip where it's narrowest and proceed up. That leaves me a scar to follow. My initial flakes that I run from the tip, what I do is I force my flakes to go towards the point or out of the stone rather than either straight into or up. It's easier to release the flake by shooting out, giving it a chance to escape. So I'm not pushing in the direction the pressure flaker is pointing. What I'm doing is I'm putting it on there and then pulling it off in an oblique direction. One, two. You can see the tremendous amount of thinning it's done. It will not stay that much of a ratio as I go up. But what I'll do at this point is come from the other side. Again, I'm pushing out towards the point for an easier release of that flake. One, two. Now I'll just follow that line right on up, do this side, and then flip it over, set up my platforms, and do the other. Gotta be careful, I'm putting a lot of force on that. If that tip was to push down on something that was firm, it just could break off. As it's getting wider, I want to make sure I have a good solid platform to push. I'd really like this flake to go at least to the halfway or beyond because I have just the slightest little step here where my last flake terminated. But I have this difficult spot right here, and it just does not want my antler tip to grab a hold of it and release. I'm just making it worse. So using copper, which is somewhat stronger than the antler, I should be able to isolate this because I can get a lot finer point on the copper tip and direct my energy through that. There goes one. I got through the worst part. I still have a little spot right there, but this is a good example of where copper's picking up where my antler wouldn't. We'll try a little different tip on this. I feel if I keep messing with the antler to correct my mistakes, I'll end up with not too much of an arrowhead left. Notice how I have two fingers holding the opposite side of that piece, and when I push down, I'll allow it to roll. Once I have it in position, it's the strength of my hand that's holding it in position, but my knees are doing the squeezing. I'm not going to take another series of flakes here yet because I'm getting a little of that mountain range that I don't like right here. So what I'm looking at is I can likely bring my line straight across here and then shoot flakes down from the base. Once I had an old friend of mine tell me, "John, it ain't a mess up if you can fix it." Now I'll turn this over, and then run a series of flakes up, which is my not so nice clean side. A little bad area right in here. I'm going back to the copper again, just because it can, and I may not be able to do it with the antler. To get this out, I'm going to sacrifice a little bit on my length. I have to get rid of that tip. Well, it got me through that. Okay, so that's the side I did my series on first. This is the size I just did a series on. So now, let me square the base of my triangle, run some flakes on one or both sides down, touch up the sharpness of my edge on both sides, notch it, and we'll have an arrowhead. That's as sharp as I can get that. Might be other ways of doing it. That's just the way I'm getting it. Just another typical side notch. I like side notches. They're practical, and they're attractive points or classical arrowheads. Your side notches, they only need to be deep enough to hold several wrappings of sinew, which is not very thick, or some other type of lashing. But your base notch, you just want to get that as wide as your arrow shaft so it fits into it. The deeper it is, the more that shaft can wrap around the stone to create a tighter bond. Take your base and break a notch out of your shaft. You just want the notch wider or as wide as the shaft so the shaft can really reach down in. You don't have to dig that notch quite as deep. And then you can lash your fibers around, and you would have a really tremendous tight bond between your shaft and your point.